Hi everyone. I've been pretty ill since the last video I brought out, so I wanted to do something easy, and I've had a number of suggestions for reaction videos. Those are videos in which I respond to some popular YouTubers' rubbish arguments, and because the arguments are rubbish, they tend to be quite easy to take down. The only difficult bit is having to watch the tedious things in the first place. So call me a masochist, but I've chosen to do another one of Hunter Avallone because I thought some of the points raised in it were worth looking at. It's called Transphobia is Fake, in quote marks, because this is not obviously Hunter's opinion, but that of the woman he is reacting to. She goes by the name of Gothix, and she's a conservative Trump-supporting Christian, just as Hunter used to be, so I'm told. So we might perhaps expect some natural empathy and understanding from Hunter as someone who was once where Gothix is now. Whereas I guess I don't have too much in common with either of them. Let's begin.
I just ate 20 milligrams of my edibles, so hopefully we're able to get through this video.
Okay, so Hunter begins by telling us he has partaken of a mind-altering substance, possession of which is illegal where I am, presumably not where Hunter is. Does this mean he'll be all mellow and not behave anything like an obnoxious, shouty, sweary brat who's been confined to the basement of his parents' gaff? We'll see. And let's meet Gothix.
What's up everyone, my name is Gothix and welcome to my channel. For today's video, I wanted to talk about transphobia and why that's not really a thing. Try articulating this argument. People look at me like I'm crazy, you know, and they say, well, obviously you would think that, transphobe, you know? And usually what happens is they will send me an article of a trans person getting killed or some type of hate crime, and they'll use this as a way to justify that transphobia exists. It's worth noting here that phobia means fear, and 90% of the time when people say transphobia, they're not actually describing fear. They're describing some type of bigotry or violence or something you know, it's not fear. I ain't afraid of nobody, all right?
I'm sorry, the footage of Gothix is kind of jumpy. That's because I've removed Hunter's constant interjections as she's speaking so we can hear Gothix uninterrupted. Before we hear any more, is Gothix correct in her point about fear? The word phobia comes from the Greek and it does mean fear, and it has evolved to mean an irrational fear. Obviously not all fear is irrational. I would certainly say that fearing trans-activist violence is perfectly rational because it's a fear based on how they have already behaved on many occasions now. So that isn't any kind of phobia, let alone transphobia. The NHS website describes a phobia as a kind of anxiety disorder characterised by an overwhelming and debilitating fear of an object, place, situation, feeling, or animal. We know about claustrophobia, acrophobia, arachnophobia, and the rest of them. Now, when I first heard the word homophobia, which would have been well into the 1980s, I remember thinking, so that's what it's called. That's handy, having a word for it. The it being the silly, incomprehensible prejudice against gay people. I've since learned that the term homophobia was coined in the 1960s by an American psychologist, and obviously it doesn't refer to an irrational fear so much as an irrational prejudice. Okay, you could argue that it's a prejudice born of an irrational fear, but it's not the kind of overwhelming and debilitating fear that happens with anxiety disorders. And on reflection, I think it's a shame that the man came up with homophobia rather than homomisia, based on the Greek word for hatred, and which I found does exist as a word in English, but I've never heard it used, though it seems more accurate to me. Now, the word transphobia is obviously inspired by the word homophobia, and for the same reason, I think it would be more accurate to call it transmisia, but I'll stick with transphobia for the purpose of talking about whether it's real or not. What does Hunter think?
Let's go ahead and look it up. Define transphobia. Dislike or strong prejudice against transgender people. Uh-oh. Well, Gothix, you told me it means you're scared. Ooh. I'm scared of trans people. That's not what the definition says, actually. It's dislike or strong prejudice against transgender people.
Well, I guess we have to give this one to Hunter. Oh, hang on a minute. Let's zoom in here. So Hunter is using the definition from dictionary.com, but look at the second entry. Why, it's Merriam-Webster, reportedly America's most trusted dictionary, and it defines transphobia as an irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against transgender people. Okay, I'm taking the point away from Hunter and calling it a draw.
So again, this entire video could have just not been made had she actually taken the time to type in a simple Google definition and then clicked the enter key. But that wouldn't provide for very good content, now would it?
Fair dues. And you could have taken the time to look at another dictionary instead of making an ass of yourself, and that wouldn't have made such good content either. Next.
So, in order for me to believe in transphobia, I would have to first believe in the idea of trans. And I don't.
No. What? I just don't believe in trans. They're not real. So all the trans people throughout history, were they just like, pretend? Were they just a figment of your imagination?
No, the trans people throughout history are a figment of your imagination, Hunter. This has to be one of the worst arguments ever. Those who make it apparently think, well, there are trans people today, therefore there must always have been trans people. Stands to reason, don't it? But when they make the argument, they do it the other way round, as an unsupportable and therefore fallacious appeal to antiquity. There have been trans people throughout history. Look at Joan of Arc or those cross-dressing priests in ancient Greece. Therefore, trans people today exist. The advantage of the fabricated absurdity called the transgender umbrella is that they can include under it a whole range of people whose reasons for doing what they did, for dressing or behaving in a way that was gender non-conforming for their time, were very different from each other, and none of them were about supposedly having been born in the wrong body.
When people say, well, you're denying my existence as a trans person, to that I would say, yes, I am. I am denying the existence and legitimacy of this concept of trans, because what is it you're trying to describe here? You are still describing a man or a woman. If you get more specific, you can say man who is confused about their gender, woman who is struggling with her identity. Either way, it's a man or a woman. Back in my day, a lot of people said that this was a mental disorder. Gender dysphoria is something that affects you psychologically.
So every single time we go over these brain-dead transphobe videos, they all do pretty much the identical thing. The same, well, I thought it was a mental illness, and then they go to gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness, Gothix, but not every single trans person, one, has gender dysphoria, and two, being trans in and of itself is not a mental illness. It's simply having gender dysphoria that's the mental illness, okay? This isn't that hard to understand, but then again, what the would this dumb boomer know? You know, back in my day, we used to give people lobotomies when they were being all kooky.
Why is he calling her a boomer? She looks pretty damn good for a woman of my generation, doesn't she? I think you'll find, Hunter, that the post-war baby boom was over by the 1980s, and we boomers are still all under the age of 80, just about, and don't actually speak like cartoon caricatures of ancient hillbillies. Ageism is perhaps the last socially acceptable prejudice, and I've noticed that it particularly afflicts members of the gender cult. But why is Hunter being so vile about someone who's just expressing an opinion? Actually, it's not even an opinion, is it? It is a fact that a lot of people said that this was a mental disorder, gender dysphoria. Or, more accurately, it is widely held that the reason people transition is because they have gender dysphoria.
You guys don't transition. You guys are not diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which is the mental illness that trans people have.
That was Blair White giving the non-binaries a piece of his mind. But Hunter is right, of course. Not all trans-identifying people have a mental illness. Some of them just have a fetish that isn't so severe that they want to make irreversible changes to their appearance and body parts. They just want to ponce around in dresses and makeup and jewellery and have people reinforce their erotic fantasies about themselves. Back in my day, they were called transvestites and cross-dressers. Now they're all under the trans umbrella and they're so oppressed. Poor dears.
I take it a step further and I say a spiritual disconnect. There's something internally, spiritually, that's off. Either way, it's abnormal.
Yes, you see, it's very abnormal. However, having a spiritual entity, first of all, she's a Christian, so believing in a spiritual entity that literally goes against the laws of nature and has some spiritual disconnect with people and their identity, that's completely fine, normal, A-okay.
I'm not sure that someone so enthralled to the gender faith is best placed to criticise anyone else for having metaphysical beliefs, Hunter. One of the main differences between most adherents of major religions and your gender cult is the way you treat dissenters. Your lot are much more intolerant.
Also, just if it is abnormal, because statistically speaking it is abnormal, doesn't mean it's bad, actually, like at all. Not even slightly. Like, do you think your f***ing stupidity is normal?
Yeah, I did at this stage think how ironic that a gender cultist is calling her stupid, though neither of them are geniuses. But Hunter's evident hatred of this woman seems off the scale. Here are a few more examples collected from the whole of his video.
She's so stupid. You are so... I refuse to believe that you're actually this f***ing stupid. She's actually that f***ing stupid. And again, what the f*** would this dumb boomer know? You know? This dumb bitch f***ing piece of shit. Don't be a worthless like this Gothix piece of shit. You know what? Back in my day, we would have given this dumb bitch a lobotomy. Bring us back to the good old days.
Misogyny and racism are often sort of subconscious, of course. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that somebody who happily supports mentally ill people removing their body parts and sometimes destroying their sexual function and fertility should favour lobotomies. And I am beginning to wonder if he has actually convinced himself that Gothix is an older woman. I mean, not just old enough to be his big sister as she is, but is actually a boomer because he's just looking for more things to hate about her. He is quite disproportionately angry at her when all she's doing is making arguments, some of which are pretty silly, by the way, and not, in my opinion, worth bothering about, so I won't show them, or Hunter's histrionic responses. But it's not as if Hunter is even trans-identifying himself for him to act so offended. So what is his problem? He really needs to grow the F up. Back to Gothix.
So this is what I mean by going back to the point that in order for me to believe in transphobia, I would have to first believe in trans. All I believe are people who are struggling with their identity, but they're still a man or a woman.
This is literally the exact logic as me saying, listen, guys, racism isn't real, okay? If somebody goes out and kills a black person while calling them racial slurs, well, first, for me to even believe that racism exists, I would first have to believe that black people are human. And since I don't, then racism isn't real.
I think that's a fair point from Hunter. It shows the problem with her argument. Her argument being that to believe in transphobia, she has to believe in trans people, and she doesn't. And obviously what she means by that is that she doesn't believe that some male people are born into female bodies and are perceived to be girls when really they are boys, and the other way round. And that it is your gender identity and how you feel and not your sex that determines whether you're a man or a woman. As the worthless Wikipedia page puts it, trans woman, short for transgender woman, is a woman who was assigned male at birth. Gothix doesn't believe that, I don't believe that, and if that is your definition of a trans person, then it's easy enough to say there's no such thing and you can't hate something that doesn't exist. But there are people who call themselves transgender, And what I understand by that, or at least my most charitable interpretation, is that there are people who choose to present as the other sex in order to make themselves feel better. Whatever the reason, there are what I call trans-identifying people. They exist, and frankly, I am sick to the back teeth of the dumb comments I get posted below my videos saying trans people exist. People who call themselves trans exist, but no woman was born into a male body and no man was born into a female body. That is a metaphysical belief that I don't share, and that's all I need to say about it. But it is undeniable that people who present or try to present as the other sex, especially men who LARP as women, sometimes attract irrational hatred and violence, just as gay people have always done, just as people of ethnic, religious or cultural minorities have always done, just as anyone who is perceived as different in some way from the majority can do. When I was building my website at peaktrans.org 6 or 7 years ago, it wasn't hard to find on Twitter vile comments like the ones I'm showing here, but which I'm not reading out. If for whatever reason you can't read them, rest assured they are extremely nasty. And actually, it's still not hard to find comments like that, though most of them date back several years, even a decade. Not too many like these are posted nowadays. These people, the ones who on my website I called real transphobes, were not targeted by the gender cultists, by the trans activists or anti-woman activists, as I prefer to call them. They weren't mass reported and banned from Twitter and elsewhere like we were, even though we, and I'm talking about the TERFs now obviously, the women and men standing up to the gender bullies, we never resorted to this kind of abuse. At least personally, I have never seen a TERF tell someone to die in a fire or fellate them as the trans activists do to us, or anything like this stuff that the real transphobes say about them. Unfortunately, the trans lobby were not prepared to be honest and stick to applying the term transphobes only to those who showed actual prejudice or hate or used violence against trans-identifying people. Instead, they misuse the word against anyone who expresses an opinion, however calmly or politely, that the gender loonies don't like. We say men can't be women. We're transphobes. We don't want men in our changing rooms. We're transphobes. It's unfair for men to compete in women's sports. Transphobes. The reason they call us transphobes, of course, is because they have nothing else. The truth is not on their side. And as a weapon against us, it hasn't worked. It hasn't shut us up as they hoped, because through their repeated misuse of it, the word has become meaningless and has helped to alienate many who were prepared once upon a time to compromise. Who cares about being called a transphobe these days? So, while I do accept that trans-identifying people can be victimised, they can be the target of prejudice, discrimination, abuse and violence, I'd need to see good evidence of any of those things, and that they were caused purely because of the person's transgender identity before I take any allegations of transphobia seriously. Trans activists have stuffed this right up for themselves. I'll give the last word on this particular bit to Hunter.
She's unironically saying, well, transphobia isn't real because I have randomly and arbitrarily decided that being trans is fake. It's like, okay, cool. I don't give a shit.
No, of course you don't. That's why you made a 32-minute video and tried to get stoned out of your box first. He obviously didn't wait long enough after dropping that edible and before filming. Otherwise, I suppose he'd be going, yeah, whatever, no hassle. Did I say that out loud? Okay, next up we have a very profound and intellectually demanding discussion on hate crime. This is from a couple of minutes into the video.
And usually what happens is they will send me an article of a trans person getting killed or some type of hate crime.
Why is hate crime in quotes? Is there like do you not think hate crimes are real either? Yeah, the KKK, they never committed any hate crimes. Their violence wasn't motivated by hatred towards certain minority groups. They just really liked to hang people.
Seriously, I think we can deduce that the KKK did really like to hang people. Mostly African American people like Gothix. I'll hazard a guess that Gothix realises that when the Klan lynched black people and all the other atrocities they did, they were motivated by hate. Does it not occur to you, Hunter, that there could in fact be some other reason why Gothix is using the air quotes here? Apparently not. She returns to this about 9 minutes in.
This kind of ties into the concept of hate crimes. There's no such thing as hate crimes. There's none. There are crimes. So if we talk about transphobia in the context...
What? There's no such thing as hate crimes. She's actually doing it. Oh God, this is why I can't go over Gothix videos.
Okay, he has another hysterical tantrum here, but I'll spare you. Again, here, he doesn't even wait to hear her arguments before getting ridiculously triggered by a view she hasn't even expressed. He leaps to the assumption that by saying there is no such thing as a, quote, hate crime, she is denying that some crimes are motivated purely by hate. Nobody denies that, Hunter, for crying out loud. Try engaging brain before opening trap and lay off the edibles. It seems he hasn't even ventured out of the woke bubble long enough to realise that the legal codification of hate crime in various countries has been very controversial. Now, I'm going to have to generalise because precisely what constitutes a hate crime and what groups of people are covered by hate crime laws vary depending on which country or which state of which country you're in. There is no universally accepted definition of a hate crime or even of hate. And that's one problem with the concept. It's vague and open to widely different interpretations. For laws to be fair and workable, they need to be clear and precisely worded. But hatred is too subjective. As I understand it, a crime that is designated a hate crime will attract a greater penalty than one that isn't, and a hate crime is defined as being one in which someone is targeted because of their membership of a group defined by a specific characteristic, such as their ethnicity or religion or sexual orientation, etc. So that would certainly cover the Ku Klux Klan's violence against black people, just because they were black. To take the example Hunter has given us, he said, if someone kills a black person while calling them racial slurs. But what if there were just racial slurs and no actual violence? Would that be a hate crime? I think in some jurisdictions it probably would. It would certainly qualify as hate speech. But should hate speech be criminalised, or is that too much of an infringement on people's free speech? For hate crime, the law in England and Wales recognises 5 categories: race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and transgender identity, but not sex. So, a crime in which a man is assaulted because he LARPs as a woman could attract a greater sentence than a woman who is assaulted because she's a woman. That's not considered a hate crime. As Hunter might put it, the Yorkshire Ripper didn't attack all those women with hammers and knives because he hated women. He just liked attacking random people and killing them, and they all just happened to be women. Andrew Doyle has just published a Substack post on the subject of hate crimes. It's behind a paywall, but here's a paragraph. He's pointed out already that hatred, like any other emotion, envy, anger, pride, or whatever, can't be legislated out of existence. As for hate crimes, there is no need for mind reading in order to determine the appropriate punishment. If I am physically assaulted, it makes little difference to me if the assailant was motivated by homophobia. I would prefer the sentence to reflect the crime itself, not to be moderated according to speculations about the perpetrator's private thoughts. The state should have absolutely no license to probe inside our heads any more than employers should insist on compulsory unconscious bias training. In a free society, we are entitled to think and feel as we see fit, and so long as that does not interfere with the liberties of others, that includes the right to hate. I agree. I suppose, to be fair, I should let Gothix give her reasoning.
Okay, this trans person was killed. What are you trying to convey? You're trying to articulate a sense of urgency or heighten what actually transpired to make it seem more severe than it actually is, or worse than it would be with another group of people. I don't condone it, but by you adding that label, what is it you're trying to convey other than trying to rile people up and make them assume that these people are being targeted?
Well, maybe sometimes they are being targeted, but yes, another problem is appearing to ascribe a notion of greater severity of offence depending on whether the victim is a member of a specific group. And while the justification may be to try to promote tolerance by sending a message that crimes motivated by prejudice will attract greater penalties, there is evidence that it hasn't really worked and may even have backfired to some extent. I'll link to the review produced by the Pace Law School discussing the negative ramifications of hate crime legislation in America. So, to sum up, I disagree with Gothix on transphobia. I think it is a thing, but I agree with her that hate crimes shouldn't be a thing. They shouldn't be codified as such in law. Okay. I wish I was more compos mentis. There are other things in this video I could comment on, but I've really had enough of both of these characters for now, if not for a lifetime. So I'll leave it there and I'll hopefully feel better for next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.